there's some really powerful moments that many people who go through this kind of deep grief realize, and that grief isn't all darkness. It isn't. There's so much beauty and light because there's so much grace. And the word grace carries so much power.
Hello, everyone. This is Kathy Caprino, and welcome to my podcast, Finding Brave. I've created this show for everyone who longs to create something bold and brave in their life, to rise up, speak up, and stand up for who they are, and to reach their highest and biggest visions. Each week, I'll be speaking with inspiring guests from all walks of business, leadership, entertainment, the creative arts, and the entrepreneurial world. And they'll be sharing their intimate stories of finding brave and offer their best strategies for building your most rewarding, joyful, and meaningful life, business, and career. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Finding Brave. Once again, I'm sitting here pinching myself for the opportunity to do this work and connect with people who are so inspiring, have so much to teach us, and have, in some ways, I love to say, turned our mess into a message. Not that your life, Kristine, was a mess, but so many of the people I speak to have transformed what could be situations that could break them for good. And they've transformed them and are of help now to thousands, millions of other people. And I think you fit into that category, Kristine. We have Kristine Carlson here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Kathy, for having me on.
Okay, folks, let me tell you about Kristine, and I want you to definitely pore over Kristine's materials and videos. They're so moving, but a little bit about Kristine. She is a New York Times bestselling author and renowned speaker, recognized worldwide for the global success of the Don't Sweat the Small Stuff book series, which is fantastic, that she co-authored with her late husband, Dr. Richard Carlson. In October 2021, her life-changing memoir, Heartbroken Open, what a powerful title, was adapted into a Lifetime television biopic starring Heather Locklear, titled Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, the Kristine Carlson story. I can't wait to hear all about that. That must have been an experience. With over 30 million books in print, Kristine has emerged as a leading mindfulness expert and transformational guide, and has been featured on national radio and television broadcasts. And in her bio, you can read all about those. I love to mention this too. Through her beloved women's retreats, including her signature What Now program, Kristine serves as a guide for women navigating transition and change of all kinds. Thank you again. What an inspiring bio.
Oh my gosh. And you have the most beautiful voice.
Oh,
May I
thank
just say?
you. Thank you. I am a singer on the side, which helps, but I
Oh my
appreciate
gosh.
that.
Yeah, just beautiful. So it's
Thank you.
wonderful to listen to you. You're very melodic in the way that you speak, and I'm sure your listeners love that.
Thank you. That means the world to me, knowing that you've had about 2 billion interviews with a lot of people. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's delightful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So what we're going to focus on, although Kristine can talk about an awful lot, is recovering from grief, loss, and major life changes. And there's so much I want to start with, but can I say this? In looking at your YouTube channel and watching your introductory video where you talk about the loss of your husband, your beloved soulmate partner, and it was, of course, a sudden loss, and he was very young. You talk about what it is not to be able to say goodbye and how you had to live with that. But you also said, I can't say it without crying, that the grief transformed your life. And the way I experienced you saying that was, as horrifically hard as it was to process through that, you came out the other side another person. Is that correct?
Truly. Yeah,
Can
that's
you
just
talk
such a
about
beautiful way to
that?
say it. Yeah, I mean, I think the surprising thing for all of us when we go through a real cataclysmic change in our lives, and one that I say destroys, really annihilates your identity, whatever that is, whether it be the loss of a spouse or a child or the loss of a career, we sit in a place of, what you said earlier, we sit in a real mess,
Mm.
and all of us do. We all find the same, we find ourselves in the same place for those same identity crises that we get in. It's a low place. And I never anticipated that I would actually become more of who I really am going through the loss that I went through. But it was very clear to me very early on that I had somehow woken up to a deeper meaning in life very quickly and very suddenly. And it was like, it felt like a pressurized water hose just
Mm.
hitting me in the face. And I was really surprised. And that's where Heartbroken Open came from. I was journaling one morning not too long after Richard died. And I just remember journaling the words, "Oh my God, I can't believe this experience. I have been heartbroken open and I feel everything." And I think, we
Mm.
take for granted when life is going and humming along. We have success in life, we're building lives and such ages as your 30s and 40s and 50s. And then you go through a sudden loss like I did. It's sort of like you're catapulted into a totally different trajectory in life. And you sit there and you say, wow, what happened? Like, how did this happen? But in that,
Mm.
I
Mm.
started to really, I started to really realize how much I had been holding life and living,
Holding it?
holding it, like
What's
holding
that
it.
mean?
Well, now I think in terms of really being deeply engaged in my life in a very present sort of way. And at the time, I realized that I was living within my role as a wife and a mother, and I wasn't really acknowledging what I felt passionate about. And I wasn't really acknowledging maybe what my own personal needs might have been because I was serving my family, serving my husband. And it was
Wow.
as if not, it's as if as hearing the news and just going through that first few months of loss, I realized how much I had been holding this very perfect life, and holding meaning not really living it, but holding the space for it and holding everyone else in it. And when
Wow.
Richard died, it all came crashing down and I felt shattered and my heart was broken. But in that brokenness, I also became open, and open in the sense of, when I say feeling, I just felt everything. I felt tremendous grief and sorrow, and I also felt tremendous bliss. And it all happened within a huge range every
Wow.
single day. And I felt tremendous anger. But see, all of these things I started to equate with, well, this is life. Like, this is what being alive is. Like, it's
Wow.
feeling everything. And I realized I hadn't been feeling deeply a lot of things for a long time, and had wondered about that. So it really awakened me. I awakened at a very deep heart level, and I think that's what can happen for many people. I often say,
Mm.
you can become better for having gone through loss, or you can become bitter, but there's not a lot of gray area for a lot of people. It comes down to really a very profound choice that we have to make, and that is that we are going to walk the walk of grief. We are going to embrace change, and we are going to let go of a dream that was our future on some
Mm.
level. And it's hard work. It's very, very hard internal work. And as apropos to your podcast, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to do so.
It sure does. I mean, you speak such truth, so I know every word is true. That's how I experience you. Yet you've come to the other side with kind of a miraculous experience of living full out the finding brave path. Um, I wonder how many people you work with get there.
That's a good question. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's this woman, Mary, and she's a really dear friend to this day, but I met her about 2 years into my grief. And right after I had written the first rendition of Heartbroken Open, and it was just coming out. And
Mm.
some friends called me and said, we have this widow and she's a recovering alcoholic, and, we're worried about her. And would you meet with her? And
Wow.
so I met with Mary, and she was just, distraught and in the very early stages of grief. And she'd lost her husband pretty recently. And I remember I was only 2 years ahead of her, but to her, that she thought I was just way far ahead in my grief, and we laugh about that now. But I remember I looked in her eyes and I said, Mary, I said, I know this isn't a club that you ever wanted to belong to. I didn't either, but here we are. And I said, you're going to be okay. You are going to be okay. And I said, look in my eyes, look in my eyes, look in my eyes. And she looked at me, and I put my hands across the table and I said, what do you see there? And she said, well, I see hope and I see strength. And I said, you're going to be okay because I'm okay. And you've got a ways to go, but I'm here for you, and I'll hold your hand, and you're going to make it through this. And I was so proud of her because, she never went to alcohol. And for, if she was ever going to again, it would have been during this time because it was so hard.
Wow.
But I watched her just not only survive her loss, but change and thrive. And one of the funniest things she ever said was, she called me up and she goes, oh my God, Chris, everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone thinks I'm just so nuts. And I go, well, Mary, you're not crazy, but you are in a transformation. So it feels crazy. And I said, hang on, it's going to be okay. And then she'd call me up and she'd say, hey, you know what? It was a whole lot easier being Catholic.
Oh,
and it's not as if she gave up her Catholic upbringing, but she had expanded so much. And to this day, I mean, Mary is she is just such a strong, amazing example of how when you do surrender into your grief and you allow it to transform you and you don't resist it, how you come out the other side and you're just that much better for having gone through your experience of it.
What's crazy to me? That is so beautiful. But I'm reading 2 books now. And interestingly, I did so on a long Amtrak train to visit my 98-year-old mother this weekend.
Oh,
And there's
sweet.
so much emotion to it, which we won't get into here. But one book is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which we
I
were just
love that
speaking
book.
about. And I haven't read it. It is my favorite book ever. And I hadn't read it maybe in, I don't know, 6 years. It's different when you read it again. But I want to ask you something that I feel is a tie-in. But the other book, forgetting Reflections, it's a Buddhist book. And one of the things I got out of it was that instead of us trying to, when we're in a suffering place, to fix it, to change it, to run away from it, to numb it, how can we be in it in a more present way and watch ourselves, not trying to race to fix? Which, so back to Man's Search for Meaning, I have to ask you this. Of course, and if you haven't read it, people, I think it's a life-changing book. I recommend it. We'll link to it below. But what I'm getting out of it once again is that when there is meaning in intense suffering, even through the brutality and torture of the concentration camps, when we can find a sense of meaning for that suffering or meaning through that life, that can be strong enough to buoy us through it and to even thrive in it, which I think is really incomprehensible to a lot of people. Would you agree with that? That I think the answer is glaringly obvious when we look at your materials, but have you found a different meaning than you had before? Is your meaning supporting people who have been through this? I'd love to hear your thoughts on meaning and being present.
Yeah, well, gosh, I'm first of all, that book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, is is really was one of Richard's all-time favorite books and one
Kidding.
of mine. So, I mean,
Wow.
he serves as such an incredible, I mean, the premier example of resilience, of somebody who put into practice everything that any person would hope to prescribe to in mental health and wellness. That um, that was just an amazing story, and his outlook was amazing, and that he could find that inner peace and that inner place of how to see the meaning and what was going on, was just incredible.
Okay.
And I think that those kinds of examples are they're almost archetypal in a sense, that they're within us. We almost
Mm,
have sort of a tide of DNA to it, like that I honestly don't believe that everything happens for a reason, and I don't really believe in coincidence.
interesting.
I think that we have to find the reason for what happens in our lives, and that in that space of making meaning, then everything appears to have its reason,
Oh,
you
that's
know?
brilliant.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so I feel like our spiritual philosophy, Richard's and
Mm,
mine, was understanding that nothing was accidental in life. And that really helped me a lot when Richard died suddenly, because, he died on a flight to New York from a pulmonary embolism. And he was only 45 years old, and I was 43, and we had two daughters in high school. So it was
oh,
incredibly traumatic and unexpected. And yet there was some part of me, because I could track, like, the day he died, it happened to be St. Lucia Day, and that was she was the inspiration to authors, and she
oh
was
my.
about love and kindness. And the last timestamp on his computer, he had written a blog right before he closed his eyes on the descent of the flight, and it was about love and kindness.
Oh
And
no. My
there were all
gosh.
these things that showed me that there was some sort of divine plan at work here. And while it certainly didn't fit my plan, and it didn't, I don't believe, fit Richard's either, it was what it was. And I think that
Mm,
that really helped me to understand that it wasn't an accident that he died, that this might have just really been his time.
mm,
And and it wasn't like an immediate sense of acceptance of his death. It took me a very, very long time to accept that he would never be walking through the door again. But these kinds of things that I thought about, and parts of my philosophy, really helped me to, like you say, buoy to the top every day. And I mean, there's some practical things that I did that I'd love to share too.
yes,
And
please.
and that was that immediately I just intuitively knew not to numb out to the pain, that I knew I'd never experienced any kind of suffering like this before. But I knew that I needed to go through it. And I knew I just, based on all my personal development work and many of my friends that are in the personal development space, I was wise enough to
Mm,
know that I had to go into it. I couldn't avoid grief. It was gonna
mm,
find me. And Richard was way too important in my life, and was my person, that I couldn't even know how I was going to breathe without him, much less live a day without him. But every
wow.
day I stepped in and I surrendered, and I followed a mantra, and it was literally surrender, trust, and accept. And I
Yes.
said that to myself thousands of times a day: just surrender to this, trust and accept. And it started to become a real pathway for me, and a
Mm,
pathway to just wake up to, and just be in the day in that way of surrender, and allow myself to just, after I got my kids off to school, I would just sit in the silence of my house, or a friend would come over and we'd cry, and we'd walk, and we'd just talk. And I just let myself be in that space. And I started to feel this sense of peace come over me and this sense of inner joy starting to rise. Um, and it would be like terrible sorrow and then joy the next moment. And I kind of did this real roller coaster for a long time. But I also noticed that
Mm.
that was my body's way of rewarding me for going into the grief. Was I felt this sense of peace and bliss afterwards. And
Wow, Christine.
yeah, so there's some really powerful, moments that many people who go through this kind of deep grief realize, and that grief isn't all darkness. It isn't. There's so much beauty and light, because there's so much grace, and the word grace carries so much
Mm.
power.
Where's
That
the
when
grace? How did you see grace? And before you answer that, Christine, I need to ask a question. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I feel being a spiritual person, me, not religious,
yeah, me too.
I feel that in order to accept, that's where most people are going to get hung up. From my time as a therapist, rape, incest, pedophilia, suicidality, drug addiction, yikes. I need to ask this question because I'm curious. Friends have, I'll make this quick. Friends have said to me, Kathy, sometimes a butterfly is just a butterfly because I see meaning in everything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
this is my belief and I'm sharing it with listeners, take it or leave it. I really believe, and I'm sure people are going to go, oh, she's lost it. Here's a woman who writes for Forbes, but I believe we've had many lives and we will have many lives. And I believe there's an overarching soul. And I believe we have an idea of what is going to be happening in the life we choose. So in that way, and I don't believe it's fated and set in stone, but I believe that the soul experience is very different from the human experience. And therefore, when like someone might say, well, who would sign up to lose their husband, or who would sign up to die in a tsunami? The thing is, I think the soul is looking for learning and evolution.
Absolutely. I have the same exact
Do
philosophy.
you?
So, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All
I
right.
don't
So,
really see why having many lives is that far of a big concept for most people, but I
mm,
think that you have to go deeper than that and realize that the soul is eternal, and the soul, that when we're in this human life, this is a very temporary experience.
yes.
And we tend to think as human life as the permanent experience, but it
And
really is
the
not.
end. And this is it. So you better get it right in 80 years. But
Yeah.
here's my question. We'll see, if God forbid, I'm going to face stuff that we all face. But I believe that acceptance, when you believe that the soul signed up for it in some way, acceptance is a little closer than this is my 80 years, 90 years, 98 years from on the 100 years on the planet. This is it. It better be good. I better not blow it. What do you say to people who, I'm guessing you've heard 10 billion times, no, I don't want to accept this? Do you
Oh
hear
yeah.
that? Is
Yeah.
that the
Oh
one of the
yeah.
biggest things you're hearing? No, why should I accept this?
Well, yes. And really, honestly, what somebody truly doesn't want to accept is it's not so much the death, it's about the death of the dream.
Who
It's
they cannot be any longer without this, right? In
yes,
their
yes,
mind.
yes. And that's what they
Death of
don't
the
want to
dream.
accept, is that they have to step into life and create a new life. And that's the hard part. It is. It's the hard part. But once you get there, once you start really living again, and you find out who you are, I mean, that's the other piece, is that we're really different after we go through loss, and we're very different after we've been with a person that we love and spent so much time with them. I mean, we become like our spouses and they become like us. It's just natural for human beings to take on each other's characteristics and all sorts of things in life. And so, suddenly you're this, woman, or you're this man and you're without your spouse, or you're this mother or this father and you're without your child. And And you got to find out who you are now outside of that role and outside of that relationship. And that's different. I remember just feeling like I was this young girl again. Here I was in my 40s, and I remember being dropped back to a lot of the insecurities I felt when, when Richard wasn't there before I met him. And I thought, this is so weird. Like, I'm like, this is so weird. And yet I made the leap much faster than it didn't take me 30 years to catch up to myself. Thank God. But I realized, wow, I'm really insecure, kind of like I was before I met him. And I thought, well, that's because the relationship, the marriage, became this blanket. The insecurity always was there. It's just that I just didn't have to acknowledge it for 30 years. And so suddenly I'm like, oh wow, there it is again. I need to deal with this.
Wow.
So it's a very rich learning, very fertile learning experience and ground. And I remember John Welshons, who wrote a really wonderful book called Awakening from Grief. I remember he was one of Richard's very closest friends. In fact, he was the one I chose to go and identify Richard in the morgue, or in the morgue at New York, because he lived in New York. And it was so crazy because John went to go identify Richard for me. And a couple of things happened when he went there, or when he went to schedule his appointment. He opened his appointment book, and the coroner said, well, she was a woman, and she said, well, come at Friday at 2:00 if you can. And he looks down in his appointment book, and there it said Richard Carlson at 2:00 on Friday. That Richard had been flying to New York and they had an appointment time at 2:00 on Friday. And then John couldn't help but laugh because he knew Richard and would never miss an appointment.
My God.
But and then it turns out the
What a
coroner
story.
was a huge fan of Richard's, and
What?
she was so impacted by his work. And there were just all these very auspicious moments like that. But I remember John said to me pretty early on, Chris, you're standing on some of the most fertile ground of your life right now. And the growth that you are going to go through is going to be so exponential to your life. And I remember thinking, God, I hope so, because if I have to go through this, it better count for something big.
Better be good here.
Better be good. Yeah.
I'd love to punctuate something you said. I lost a friend of mine who was, I believe, 84, and I'm 62. And we had an amazing 10-year relationship while we were working together. But her daughter called me to say that she had passed. And I was just so upset, of course. And about 2 months later, I was sitting at the beach here recently. And my friend Ann and I would spend a lot of time on the beach. That's what we did. She lived in Naples, and it was my respite there to go visit her. And there was a seagull, and there were lots of seagulls that would come down. They wanted our food, our sandwiches, whatever. I'm alone on the beach. Down it comes. And it sat next to my towel, and it looked at me, and I went, buddy, what do you want here? And it did not leave, Kristine, for 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh,
And
there was Anne.
There was Anne. I'm like, are you Anne? So
Yep.
the second thing I'd like to punctuate is there are signs.
Oh, there are,
And do you
absolutely.
believe kind of the
Oh, I
veil that we
do.
think is so non-traversable is much thinner than we
Oh,
think?
it's so thin. It's paper thin. It's so paper thin. I believe like it's all right here, and it's up to us to access it. It's up to us to open ourselves to, higher dimensions, really. I mean,
That's it.
greater dimensions, stronger energies. We have to be open to transcending the human body and having a truly rich spiritual experience. But that's not easy. I mean, the mind is a powerful thing.
Wants to
And
keep us safe. So that's
yeah,
another question I have for you, if I can. I'm probing deep here. It's a therapy session. I'm back to the accept part. Tell me what you think. But in my time as a therapist, I would see that given what someone had experienced, it would appear that the bandwidth for change, the bandwidth for growth, for some could be infinite. For others, it was this. For others, it was this. Like one of my clients watched his stepfather shoot his mother to death when he was a child.
Oh.
And I do think when you're a child, you don't have the coping mechanisms. You internalize, and the trauma is probably different within your cells, et cetera. But I'm interested in your thoughts about when you have seen someone fail at stepping into the new dream, the new story. They just can't. They won't accept. Is there a recurring through line about, I don't want to say what's missing, that sounds pejorative, what maybe those individuals aren't doing or aren't having that get them to it, acceptance?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I have my own like kind of idea about that, and that
I'd
is
love to
that
hear it.
I feel like there's a real pivot turn that a person has to make when they face undesirable circumstances of any kind. And the true pivot is really to answer one question for yourself. And that is, are you going to be the victim in the circumstances? Are you going to sit in victimhood, or are you going to be heroic and be the hero or the victor of your circumstances? When you go back to Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, he was definitely not a victim within the most horrific circumstances. And you can see that the mindset, the way that the path of the mind goes in victimhood is to wallow in self-pity and go down that rabbit hole, and get stuck, get very stuck in feeling that real sense of victimhood. And it's not as if the hero in making that choice doesn't mean that you don't feel sorry for yourself sometimes, but you don't get stuck there. You tend to step into life and say, okay, well, I don't like that this happened, but this is what I get. This is what I've gotten. This is here, and I need to deal with this. And it's a just much more empowered attitude, isn't it?
It so is. It reminds me of my 98-year-old mom who lost dad 10 years ago, and they'd been married 56 years. She kind of fell apart, but then bounced back. And I always call her my warrior spirit, because she wasn't going to let it vanquish her. And, I think what's encouraging about that is she wasn't an educated woman. You don't need to have a psychological degree. You don't need to be a therapist. She's a tough cookie, and said, what am I going to do? Bemoan every day of my life without your father? Oh. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about. It's a choice.
It is a
It's a
choice.
choice.
It is a choice, and it's a choice you have to make sometimes many, many, many hundreds of times before you start really living into it. But I think if you don't know that that's a choice, and you don't know that you're making that choice, it's harder.
It is harder.
It's much harder.
What a story. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Anything you think we don't understand well enough about? And before I ask that question, I do want to say, and you mentioned it, I feel like I went through a terrible grief loss period when I was laid off after 9/11, in a way, after sexual harassment, after hell on wheels, in a way that broke me. And so what I want to share from the perspective of a former therapist is, we can feel desperate grief over something that someone thinks, what's your problem? You got laid off. You hated that job anyway. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I encourage people, when they hear friends or family members who seem broken by an event that one would judge as, what is this big deal here? Now, of course, that's nothing like loss of a husband. But I think everyone, it's the loss of the story, the loss of the
Mm-hmm.
identity. And
Yes.
often that identity isn't your real identity anyway.
No.
And the loss of it, for me, I think it paves the way to who you really want to be in the world. But I would ask everyone to be not judgmental about it. If someone's going through something terrible and you think, what is the big deal here? Why is it? And how about timelines to grief? You should be over this by now. Oh, no.
No.
Do you agree with what I'm saying? That it could be something that other people think, what is the big deal here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen people go through really messy times in their life, and it could be even just by thinking that they might have a health issue, or then they don't, or they're under tremendous stress, or they think they should be further along on their career path than they are. I mean, people go through all kinds of messy times. But one of the things that when you asked me, it was so interesting because that was right on the tip of my tongue when you asked me, what would I love to tell your listeners
Yeah.
that maybe hasn't
Yes.
been gone over? And then you said it because
Oh,
I was
come
like,
on.
because I was like thinking there's something that Richard used to say, and this came back to me so much in my own healing journey, and that was that the circumstances of life don't make or break you, but they reveal who you are. And I love that
Oh,
so much.
so beautiful.
Yeah, because how you show up amidst those circumstances is who you really are. And you can make different choices and changes at any time in life, and that is the path of growth, and that is the trajectory that we are on in the human life. Is, you talked so much about earlier about the soul, and I feel that way, that the soul, comes into the body for the human expression of what it means to be in human life. But then when we die, the soul leaves the body and returns to source and eternity, and returns to, this ever-present experience of life. But it's not human, but it's still present. It's a
Beautiful.
presence. And so I really think for people to understand that this, when you go through something cataclysmic, it's yes, you can acknowledge it's horrible, but you can also be open to the idea that this really might have happened for you in your life to open you to a greater experience of what it means to be alive. And when we can get to that place, then we can also get to the greater experience of what it means to be in love with our life. And that if we really love life and really love the expression of what this human life has to offer us, then we can have that love affair to its greatest degree. And that sometimes being broken open means you get to be open to having that greater joy. That one of the last things I want to say is that the quote that resonated so deeply with me when I was in deep grief was from Kahil Gibran, from the prophet. And he says that our joy is our greatest sorrow unmasked. And when you take off the mask of sorrow, meaning you go through the path of grief and you express that grief and you let that grief out, then you're carving out this place in your heart and in your body and your whole being to be in joy. And that eventually, there is no timeline to grief. Your timeline is purely your own, but eventually you will return to such joy you never even knew. And I'm the living testament of that. I am living just such an incredible life of joy today. And I never would have thought, like I said, I could have ever lived one day without Richard. But he's with me.
I know
Just
that.
as your mother is with you.
Yeah, I
And
know
Anne
that.
is, and Anne is too, and my friend Melanie too.
I love it. And I want to stop talking and let everyone just soak in what you said, but I have to add, I was looking for books to take on this trip. The Prophet, I found it, I opened it, there was Anne's inscription. Can you believe it?
Wow.
Dear Kathy, fellow journeyman on this road of life. What a number of coincidences here, Kristine. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, or maybe not. Maybe no
I
coincidence
don't
at all.
believe in, I don't. Serendipity, synchronicity, but what
Mm,
you have to say and share is so beautiful, and the world is
thank you,
so fortunate to
Kathy.
have you, Kristine.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
being here. Please come back again and we can talk about. Look, we took one sentence and dove into every word, it seems,
I'd love to come back. Thank you.
Please do. I wish you all the best and thank you for your bravery and your courage and lighting the light for other people. It's so
Uh,
inspirational.
it's been an amazing journey, and it fills my heart with joy to do so.
I can see that. And where do people soak up everything you have? And where do they watch the Lifetime show? Where do we get everything that you have to offer?
Yeah, well, to find the Lifetime movie, you just really need to do a search if you have a cable, or I think you can even find it on YouTube. I mean, you just have to do a search, you'll find it.
Okay.
And it's called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, the Kristine Carlson story, starring Heather Locklear.
So great.
And then you can just go to my website, KristineCarlson.com, and that's with a K. Kristine, and Carlson is with a C.
Yeah, we will link to it below. I can't wait to just pour over everything you have, even
Thank you.
more, a 10th time. Thank you again. All
Thank
right,
you.
everyone. I hope you're inspired. I hope you're moved. I hope if, the hair on the back of your neck stood up or you felt a little rush of something, maybe think of it as there's a sign that there's something I could do that would help me on this journey. I hope wherever you see this, and if you have a question or you're going through a challenge, that you'll leave a comment and we will both do our best to support you in any way we can. Thank you for being here. I love this Finding Brave community and this experience. What a gift it is. Thank you. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone. Hi, folks. Kathy here. I'm so excited to share that starting in February, I'm offering a new 8-week live coaching and training course all around the content of my book, The Most Powerful You. The course teaches both men and women how to recognize and close what I've seen are the 7 most damaging power and confidence gaps that keep us from having a happy and successful career. When you have these gaps, you simply cannot thrive in your work. And there's a lot of pain, conflict, and challenge. The course offers 8 weekly Zoom coaching calls with me, 8 video training modules, a step-by-step process for boosting your career, confidence, and impact, fantastic additional resources from over 30 of the nation's top experts, a private online support community for members, and more. To learn more and claim your spot, sign up for my newsletter at kathycaprino.com/sign up and watch for the updates. People who have taken this training have called it transformational and life-changing. And I'm confident it will help you too. See you there. Thanks so much for joining us today. And please don't forget to check out findingbrave.org for more programs, resources, and tips. And tune in next time for your weekly dose of Finding Brave.